is Damon Fordham, and I'm here to tell you today about a very important chapter in African American history, and it's folklore. And this deals with the stories of one known as Brer Rabbit. Now, this tale takes us way back to the days of West Africa, when you had these people known as griots. The griots were the storytellers who passed down the lore and folklore to generations of Africans. And of course, they would spread this down through the generations, and during the days of slavery, when many of these Africans were brought in slavery to America, that tradition would continue to be passed down. In one case, there was a former slave by the name of Prince Baskin down in Port Royal, South Carolina, who was owned by a man named Nathaniel Higler. Shortly after the Civil War ended, there was a lady from Springfield, Massachusetts by the name of Abby Christensen who came down to record the lore of former slaves. Prince Baskin told her about his African grandfather who passed down the following story to him about a person who he referred to as Brer Rabbit. Brer, of course, was the slave's dialect for brother. And about how he outsmarted a wolf. And the story went like this. He said that once upon a time during the nighttime, there was this wolf who was basically growing this field full of peanuts, and then he would get up in the morning and he noticed that there were these rabbit tracks next to the peanuts and all the peanuts were gone. Well, so he said, must have been that rabbit and steal my peanuts again. So he had an idea. First thing he did was he built a scarecrow in order to scare the rabbit away, so that the next day the rabbit came by and he saw the scarecrow there and said, that must think I'm crazy, thinking that something like this is going to scare me. So he took his hand, just pushed down the scarecrow. So the rabbit went on and ate the peanuts. Next morning, the wolf got up and said, that rabbit think he's slick, huh? Well, I'm going to fix him. Darling, he said to his wife, and the wife said, yes, there's this. We're going to have us some rabbit stew tonight. So he said, we better. We didn't have nothing to eat in this house in a long time. Well, shortly after this, he decided to take a huge lump of tar, and then he put a hat on it, and then put a pipe in its mouth and a little carrot for its nose and clothes on it to make it look like a real person. So next day the rabbit came out there and he saw the tar baby dressed up in human clothes, and he said, oh, hey, how you doing, stranger? Reached out his hand to shake it down. Son, when he reached his hand out, it went, it was tar. He couldn't get it loose. So then he took his foot and tried to, press his out, and his feet were stuck to the tar baby, and the wolf started taking his kerchief and putting it around his neck and said, ha, we gonna have some rabbit stew tonight. But then the rabbit got slick. Rabbit looked at the wolf and said, Mr. Wolf, whatever you do, you can cut my head off and you can boil me in the boiling waters, but please don't throw me in that briar patch. Briar patch? What are you talking about? That briar patch over there, Mr. Wolf. You can just slit my stomach open, you can cut my ears off, but whatever you do, please don't throw me in that there briar patch. And he said, oh, throw you in the briar patch, huh? Well, come here. So he took the rabbit and ripped him up, the tar baby, and then he held him in the air and went, 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready, and 4 to... Rabbit jumped out of the briar patch the wolf threw him into. Hey, Wolf, you're forgetting 2 things. Huh? What's that? Number 1, I was born and raised in the briar patch. Huh? And number 2, guess what? What? I'm a free man now. So the rabbit ran off and the wolf said, dang, followed again. Went back home and said, well, honey, hate to tell you this, but we ain't going to have no rabbit stew tonight. All right. So that became known as the story of the rabbit, the wolf, and the tar baby. And Abby Christensen published that story in the Springfield Republican, the name of the newspaper, back in 1874. Meanwhile, one state away over in Georgia, there was a man by the name of Joel Chandler Harris, and he was a writer at this plantation that was not too far from Eatonton, Georgia. Well, he became friendly with a man by the name of Uncle George Terrell. And Uncle George Terrell would regale him with these fascinating stories about Brer Rabbit similar to the one that I just told you. Well, years later he became a writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and he remembered the stories that Uncle George Terrell told him about Brer Rabbit and Brer Wolf and all of them, including the tar baby story. And he published them in the Atlanta Constitution, and the stories were such a big hit that in 1880 he published a book of them called Uncle Remus, His Songs and His Stories. He of course based the character of Uncle Remus on Uncle George Terrell. So this book became very successful and influenced a lot of people in the generations to come, so much so that a young man over in the Midwest in the early 1900s read these stories and were just absolutely fascinated by them. He was born in 1901, and his name was Walter Elias Disney. And so this whole saga went to sort of like full circle in 1946 when Walt Disney took the stories of Joel Chandler Harris that he read as a young boy in Uncle Remus Songs and Sayings and put them in this movie entitled Song of the South. There you see James Baskett, who was an actor on the Amos and Andy comedies in the 1940s. He played the role of Uncle Remus and won a special Academy Award for it in the year 1947, shortly before his very early death of heart failure, also in 1948. Well, so unfortunately, however, because of issues of political correctness, the movie and the book are very seldom seen today. But many storytellers who go to the schools and the libraries and tell the young people keep this tradition alive today. And while it's important to remember people like Joel Chandler Harris and Walt Disney, it's also important to remember the people such as Uncle George Terrell and Prince Baskin who originated these stories and bringing them from Africa in the first place. This is Damon Fordham, Professor of History at Springfield College and Virginia College, telling you about the Brer Rabbit stories. Have a good day.